I got my hands on the Tamron 150-500mm lens for Sony E Mount for a couple more days, so I wanted to test out the autofocus on the Sony A1 now that I have that camera to test it with. And I also have this lens here, the Sony 100-400mm lens, so I put these head to head on one of the fastest cameras on the market to see really how this performs and how it holds up to the brand name. So let's get into it. Alright, so I was hoping to shoot some kind of event or sports or action, real action with this to test it out, but everything has got postponed or rescheduled, everything, and I do have to return the Tamron lens, so I did what I could in the time that I had, and I used my kids because they're always here, and I think that I got a pretty clear result in terms of how these lenses stack up against each other on one of the fastest and best sports cameras on the market, the Sony A1. But before we take a look at those results, let's take a very quick look at how these lenses differ physically. As you can see, they're actually not that different in terms of length, and fully extended with the lens caps on, the Sony is actually just a little bit longer, but generally they're pretty comparable this way. The Sony's lens hood actually has this little window that you can open if you want to adjust something like a circular polarizer filter, and it is also a locking lens hood, so you can lock that on there. The Tamron is just a standard twist-on lens hood, nothing super special about that. But in the front here on the Tamron, you do have an 82mm front filter thread, whereas with the Sony you get 77mm. So I have a lot more 77mm filters, so using this lens means that I don't have to go out and buy a bunch more. On the Sony lens, you also of course get these custom buttons on the side, top, and bottom of the lens that you can program to whatever you want to do, but you don't have those on the Tamron body. The Tamron does have this focus ring that you can slide forward to kind of lock it in place at any point in the focal range, which can be useful, and it can also be annoying. And it does also have a lock that you can lock it closed solidly at 150mm, which is great when you're putting it in your bag and you don't want it to pull out the lens barrel when you pull it out from your bag. Not that I think many people will be using manual focus on a lens like this, but Tamron does have a very small focus ring that doesn't feel that great. However, you do get a lens foot with a built-in Arca Swiss compatible design, which is really great. You don't have to put anything else on the bottom of here to slap it onto an Arca Swiss head, which is really nice. However, this lens foot ring does need to completely open up and take it off like that. Moving over to the Sony, the zoom ring does have this adjustment where you can change it from smooth, which is like a lighter zoom, to tight, which is a little bit of a tighter zoom. It doesn't make a huge difference actually, and there is no lock that you can fully lock it in place when it's at 100mm. So when you pull this out of your bag, a lot of the times it does pull that barrel out with it. The manual focus ring here feels better, but again, it's not that significant. However, you don't have an Arca Swiss compatible foot. Of course, you have screw threads down there that you could put an Arca Swiss plate on, but it's not built into the design. And the lens foot here has a little knob on the side that you can just twist loose, as I do that awkwardly, and then there's a little quick release button, and the foot itself slides off. It's not a whole ring that you have to take off. This is easier to store when you do take it off. You can put it in your pocket, but generally speaking, of course, I like this lens foot because you have that Arca Swiss built into the bottom. All right, anyway, let's get to the tests that everybody really wants to see now. Right away, using these lenses, I could feel the difference, and I will show it to you now in real time so you can feel that difference as well. But with the Sony lens, of course, on the Sony A1, we got the full 30 frames per second, which is insane. With the Tamron lens, I immediately felt that it was slower. It cuts it in half to a maximum of 15 frames per second. Although until very recently that was more than enough, and I don't think that 15 frames per second is ever going to stop you from getting the shot. But if we're talking in terms of pure competition here, 30 versus 15, that's 2 times more frames per second with the Sony lens, because it is that native lens that can take full advantage of the camera's capabilities. Another thing you'll see in these series of shots is that, well, the Sony generally just nailed focus on pretty much every one of the shots, and we'll look at that very closely in just a second as well. The Tamron did lose it about maybe 2/3 of the way through the series of shots, and if I let up on the shutter and then started again, it would grab focus and continue focusing, but it struggled when the subject got a little bit closer. So in terms of focus, the Sony did much better, but the Tamron also did pretty good, I think. So now two things that I want to look at here. Of course, these were 50 megapixel photos. So I just want to zoom into 100% on one of the photos so you can just see in terms of pure sharpness how the sharpness compares between these two lenses. I shot them both at 400 millimeters just to be fair, because this doesn't go to 500 and I wanted this to be as comparable as possible. And now we'll just look really quickly at the whole series of photos very carefully to see exactly how many the Tamron got in focus and how many the Sony got in focus out of the entire series. Of course, because of the slower speed, the Tamron series does have the subject coming a further distance within the same number of photos. But let's just see how the results pan out. So what do you think? For me, I think that the Tamron lens did well. Didn't do spectacular. Of course, it lost focus more than the Sony lens did, and that happened in every single series of shots that I took. And of course, it only gets half the speed that the Sony lens gets, but still 15 frames per second is nothing to laugh at. It's not going to hold you back in pretty much any situation. So do you think that this Sony lens is worth pretty much double the price of the Tamron? Let me know down below. But hopefully that gave you a little bit of a feel for how these two lenses stack up against each other on one of the most challenging cameras on the market. So let me know if you have any questions or comments. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to see more in the future, and as always, thank you for watching.